This is the final PowerPoint on writing like an engineer. It covers the chapter of the same name and also the conclusion. We'll start with a few questions. First, was Windsor successful in getting her cases, her students, to see themselves as rhetoricians? And she was not. She said they saw their work as rhetorical. It means they still saw their work as not rhetorical, of consisting of reporting data, and they did not see the data at all as rhetorical. And they saw themselves as writers answerable only to that data and to the corporate hierarchy. The one exception was Chris, who wanted to be a manager, saw the value of persuasion, which that in itself is interesting. Now, the second question is, what role would technical communication have for managers in an engineering environment? And Windsor does speculate. She wonders if perhaps older engineers would have more of a sense of their work as rhetorical, or the value of rhetoric, of persuasion in their work. And I'm thinking that she was thinking that possibly they're being higher up in the hierarchy, that they would have a somewhat different perspective. For example, an assignment I've given to students before is to ask someone who works in the field they hope to work in after they finish their degree about the role of public speaking and writing. And I had an engineering student once tell me that the person he talked to had been in the field for like 20 or 30 years, and he said he didn't do much writing anymore, but he said he did a lot of reading of what people who were working for him were writing. And I would think he was also doing some writing in response, or giving some type of feedback. But the point is that your perspective changes as you move up the corporate ladder. And of course, managers do a great deal of writing. They're working with people above them in the chain of command and below them as well. So not only the immediate employees that they're managing, but also employees in other areas that they may need to communicate with, and who may be doing work for their area. A third question, do we agree with Windsor's claim that when engineers write to a broader audience or about non-technical topics, as often they must do to accomplish their jobs, they're no longer engaged in engineers writing? And I don't agree with that. I've just seen engineering students too often, when they're writing, supposed to be writing in English, they'll break down and start using formulas, even though I don't have any idea what these formulas mean, and that's a mistake. Because I, demand clarity from students, especially engineering students. And I found it a little odd too. As I mentioned, Dorothy Windsor is now retired, and she's now writing fantasy novels. And she made a comment in an interview right before she retired. She had already started writing these novels before she retired, that even she could see that in the novel she was writing about, what was important was power. What's important to people in her novels, and that sort of thing. If you're going to write that type of fantasy fiction, they're often set in imaginary kingdoms in the past or something, like the Lord of the Rings or something like that, and there's kings and queens and people at different levels, and power is certainly something that's important to them. And it's certainly an area where rhetoric comes into play. And we talk about the medieval period as being a kind of a dark ages for rhetorical theory, because there was no longer any attempt at democracy anymore. The period of we think of as democratic ancient Athens only lasted about maybe 70 years anyway. And Rome also made an attempt at democracy. It didn't last very long either. And it seems like there was always a tyrant ready to take over, and in times of war, a good, strong central leader was often important. But as we emerged out of the ancient Roman world into the medieval times, which are sometimes referred to as the Dark Ages, there wasn't any democracy. The rhetoric that we look at that time is a lot of the good examples are letters that were being written by people who were officials in different kingdoms. Okay, so in terms of looking at the conclusion to this book, I was a little bit disappointed. I would have liked to have seen her do more with writing about how different aspects of technical communication theory have come into play that her work touched upon. We were talking about risk communication, we talked about ethics, and all that sort of thing. But she doesn't do that either. And of course, the reason she doesn't do that is because she is trying to be a good ethnographer and sticking to the facts. And she had hoped that she would change her students' mind about rhetoric, and she didn't do it, so she failed. Well, the important thing is did she give up? And no, she didn't. This is her next book. It's published in 2003, and it, in this case, what she did is she studied an engineering center. It's called Pacific Engineering Incorporated, and you can read a little bit about it down below. This is from their website. And you can see this is a very specific type of engineering company. They're not planning on building bridges or even submarines, though they have a submarine on their website. What they do is they create metals out of which you can build submarines if you want to. But she wanted to look at an engineering center because she was interested in those power relationships. And she was interested in engineers as they become, or as they are cast in this type of framework. And if you look at the website, the guy who started the company was like a rear admiral in the United States Navy. And it looks like most of the people working there are engineers. Even the people doing administrative work are engineers. So she looked at a lot of these power relationships, and certainly start seeing rhetorical theory to emerge. But that's an entire book. But we can look at least here at the opening paragraph. So take a minute and read that. You can pause it if I start talking again too soon. So you can see here, she's interested in also the creation of knowledge. And so that's epistemology, of course, and the relationship of rhetoric, of persuasion to the creation of knowledge. You notice here that she says she's interested in the representing of that knowledge in various symbol systems. And so she includes, that's including not just technical writing, which is, my focus, but also thinking about the mathematical, which is not my focus, or the graphic, which I think is interesting, and then other symbol systems. It could be a computer language that she could be thinking about there. What is the relationship between the ability to embody knowledge in an object to represent knowledge in text, and to generate knowledge in a group. Well, to move along here, what I'd like to talk about last is her last article that she published before she retired. And there it is, a Technical Communication Quarterly article. And she says it's a longitudinal study of 4 engineers. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Moving into positions of authority and responsibility allows them to claim agency within the structure of the organization. Engineers moving into positions of authority. Could it be? She's also interested in agency here. Yep, it's Jason, Al, Chris, and Ted. She followed them for 15 years, interviewed them annually. She was interested in this idea of engineers as agents. What that means is she wasn't thinking of them just as employees, and she draws a parallel with doctors. You know, doctors typically, they don't think of themselves, let's say you have a doctor who works at a hospital primarily, they don't think of themselves strictly as employees of that hospital. They think of themselves as doctors, right? As people who are contributing, even if they're probably not publishing, but still contributing to their particular medical field, whether they're general practice or they're specialists. And engineers are the same way. And that's what she means there by saying the participants gain both a socially structured intent to do something and the socially structured means by which to accomplish it. As we can see, if these actions are socially structured, then it makes sense for them to actually happen. Rhetoric is going to have to come into play. Here's her method for the article. Notice that study was approved by the Iowa State University's Institutional Review Board. So if you haven't gotten your certification into me yet, that Georgia Southern requires, you need to do so, or I won't even read your final report. Okay, so here's what happened to them. Al was a labor relations specialist for an automotive manufacturer. Had become supervisor of labor relations, responsible for negotiating with 2,800 members of the United Auto Workers Union and having 4 other people reporting to him. I wonder if rhetoric plays any role in what Al does. Dealing with a union, yeah, I would think so. Ted, a project engineer. You can see that this is interesting, that he had a job change where he went to work for one of his prior employer's competitors. And then he started his own production line, designed it and installed a production line. Would that be rhetorical? Yes, I would think so. And then down here at the bottom, you can see that he needs to coordinate with 2 Japanese manufacturers. So the sort of technical communication that he's practicing is international. And when you start dealing with international audiences, it completely changes what you do. One thing is that dealing with the Japanese is that the Japanese are better about thinking about themselves as part of a group, that what they do benefits all Japanese, reflects upon all Japanese. They don't have this type of independent spirit that we have here in the United States. They're just different. different cultural setting. And you have to take that into account when you communicate with them. Chris started his own company. Certainly, that would cause him to be a practicing rhetorician as well. Because, as I was saying, these engineers, they're also business people too, whether they want to be or not. There's very little pure engineering that's done. Even at a university, you have to write grants to get funding to do any type of significant project. And then Jason, only Jason has much the same job. He's a project engineer. So, but she was saying, in a way, Jason, it would be good to measure the others against in terms of the changes they had undergone. So that's an interesting wrap to the to Dorothy Windsor and her work. And I hope you've enjoyed it and gotten something out of it, and at least been able to read and witness a longitudinal study and to see the type of dedication that it takes to really explore your work. Questions? I'll see you online.